This is NTV.
As a consequence of human population increase and development pressures driving land use change, many previously undisturbed habitats in Uganda, both protected and on private land, have been converted, cleared or otherwise degraded, as reported in the State of the Environment reports produced every 2 years by the National Environmental Management Authority of Uganda. Uganda's Vision 2040 cites the tourism industry to play a major role in the economy and a major contributor to GDP by 2040. According to the 2017 Annual Tourism Sector Performance Report, tourism is currently Uganda's leading foreign exchange earner with $1.37 billion in 2016, followed by remittances at about $1.2 billion, thus increasingly becoming an important sector to support the economic diversification of the Ugandan economy. The country has received special recognition as a great tourism destination. For example, CNN International named Uganda among the world's top 5 tourism destinations for 2017. The Rough Guides, a UK-based leading travel publisher, ranked Uganda as the best country to visit in Africa and the 4th best country to visit in the world in 2017. Amongst the innumerable species that comprise the tourist attraction jewels of this country are the big cats animals, i.e. leopards, lions and cheetahs. Unfortunately, these big cats in Uganda are quickly becoming endangered. National parks such as Lake Mburo have reportedly not had any lions since the early 90s. Queen Elizabeth, which was once well known for its large lion population, has suffered dwindling numbers over the years to the extent that it is now hard for tourists and tour operators to spot or track these cats. The government of Uganda is a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity and so is mandated and expected to have a commitment to conserve the biodiversity of this nation for the people of Uganda and the international community. In 2015, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature spearheaded a study initiative that would aid the identification of species most under threat of extinction so that authorities can target conservation efforts to where they are most needed and to generate the global red list of threatened species. The study indicated that the lions and cheetahs had become highly vulnerable and that lions are in the near threatened state. Uganda right now is remaining with an abysmal number of these big cats. The country has now an estimated 416 lions, slightly over 10 cheetahs and less than 10 leopards. NTV, in partnership with World Wildlife Fund and Shared Resources Joint Solutions Program, have teamed up to bring you a fervent discussion on how we as a nation ought to take urgent responsibility to conserve and grow the numbers of our most highly treasured natural species that are of such paramount importance ecologically and economically. You are welcome.
I'm Karaga Bodwins and we come into you live from the Kampala Serena International Conference Center. And besides being here in studio on air, please, I want you to start up by following us on this discussion kind of collaboratively online. We are on Facebook and Twitter, and we've posted the question asking what should be done to ensure that our big cats, cheetahs, lions, leopards are safe and secure in their habitats. We believe that you can be able to constructively contribute to this discussion. And let's get started. I have such a resplendent panel here of gallant public servants who are dealing with the battle to conserve our nature and specifically these particular 3 animals which are extremely endangered. And on set, just at the extreme end, I have a gentleman called David Dooley. He's the Worldwide Fund for Nature Country Director. David, you're welcome.
Thank you and good evening, viewers.
Nice to see you. And in the middle, I have a renowned cabinet minister and one of the long-serving public servants called Professor Ephraim Kamuntu, the Minister of Wildlife, Tourism and Antiquities. He's a former Minister of Water and Environment. He has served as the Chairman and Managing Director of Nile Bank Limited in the past, private commercial bank in Uganda, and he was a lecturer in Makerere University, and he is being a long-serving public servant. Very nice to see you, Professor Ephraim.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, viewers.
You're welcome. And right next to me is a great lady, Pauline Nantongo Kalunda. She's the Executive Director, EcoTrust. Pauline, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
Good evening, viewers.
You're welcome. So, right straight indeed you're the head, Professor Ephraim, you're the head of this sector of environment, wildlife, of tourism and antiquities. And so, according, of course, to the 2015, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is the body that is delegated by the UN to ensure that it oversees the conservation of nature in the world, has estimated that the study that was conducted previously by its sponsorship, of course, and the involvement with the ministry, it indicates that we have 416 lions. Perhaps there might be more, there might be less by now, and slightly less than 10 leopards, and slightly more than 10 cheetahs. So where are lions, cheetahs, and leopards inhabiting in Uganda? How safe and secure are they? And how is the ministry involved in helping the conservation of these animals?
Thank you very much, Baldwin. Let's begin by first establishing the facts. One, it is true, lions used to be plenty in the following parks: Queen Elizabeth National Park, Kidepo National Park, and Murchison Falls. There used to be lions in Lake Mburo. At the present moment, the account we have about 420 lions.
Which are not far different from the 416.
Yes, which are not very far from 116.
Yeah.
And the cheetahs are almost the same number that is being quoted. So your question is, what should we do?
What are we doing actually at the moment before
Yes,
we go
what are
on
we
to-
doing and
Yes.
what should we do to
Yes.
preserve them? Number one, you start with the mindset of a Ugandan. Unless and until majority Ugandans appreciate the conservation of nature, including lions and cheetahs and leopards, it is very difficult to have a policeman or a ranger behind every Ugandan who wants to poach. So if you can be controlled by your own mind, and Ugandans, I can plead with you, since the beginning of time, the way God created things, they are interconnected, they are balanced. Lions, cheetahs, leopards, and the rest of animal and plant. They provide medicine. From the beginning of time, they provided food, they provided shelter. It hasn't changed much. So the mind of Ugandan must be convinced that conservation is in your self-interest for your survival. So the first line of attack is to convince Ugandans to appreciate that these endowments given to us by nature must be preserved for us and future generations.
Is that what you're doing now?
And that's precisely what we are doing. We have 10 national parks with rangers. We do everything to protect these animals, including the rangers, the wardens. They are aimed at stopping, at least preventing poaching. You know the source of travel. One, it is even mentioned here. You have poachers who poach these animals. You have climate change. And this climate change is a global issue. When you have extreme drought and you have extreme hailstorms and the habitat changes, so instead of the animals keeping in the habitat, they move out. When they move out, they are killed, they are poisoned. Partly because the population fears them, they take retaliatory measures to kill the animals when they are out of the national park. They are not guarded. You have overpopulation growth, which is tied to the economic transformation of our country. As long as majority of Ugandans depend on land for their livelihood, the more population you have, the more demand for land and the more encroachment on areas where these animals will be kept. This is a challenge you need for. You see the dynamics. Unless transformation of economy happens so that people can depend on services instead of paying on land. They can depend on manufacturing and industry instead of paying on land. You have that challenge. And if you're asking me what are we doing, the vision of the country is transform the country from being peasant and poor to being a prosperous and modern country. When that is concurrently being done, you are in a way saving the animals because people no longer depend on the land. Then the issue of call it pollution and using pesticides, which become poisonous to the animals as well. This also is being handled. I'm sure if you quote NEMA is up in arms in preserving environment. You have encroachment. Yes, encroachment, and encroachment is a widespread issue. Government is doing everything to stop encroachment. When you encroach forests and wetlands and game reserves, you create a fertile ground for these animals to be wiped out.
Okay, so Honorable Minister, I'll get back to you over that. Of course,
Sure.
there's been such a huge scandalous proliferation of reports about government being redundant, about the reports made for encroachment on forests, for the abuse of nature, for taking over wetlands. So that's kind of a challenge that is at your hand. Let me come to you.
But I just want to take you on.
Yes.
Why do you say government when you are addressing an issue of human survival? Yes, government must take a role in terms of providing environment, but this is a matter for everybody.
Absolutely.
Everybody.
Yes, but you see, you have the power to actually make sure you restrain or you apprehend. But I'm going to come back to you. Let me first get to Pauline, who is part of the practitioners in the civil society. So, Pauline, just briefly let us know, because EcoTrust is very passionate in this area of conservation. Just help us understand what you're doing so that the minister knows that you have supporting partners in terms of practice, and then we move forward.
Thank you very much. EcoTrust is an environmental trust. We specialize in building partnerships for conservation, and we focus on making sure that Ugandans, practitioners, people that have innovative ideas are able to access financing mechanisms. If you realize there are very many financing mechanisms that have been developed at international level, but they are designed in a very complex language, and that the average Ugandan would not be able to access. So we put together a team of experts that undertake to understand how these mechanisms work, and then we document the innovations that are within Uganda, and we present them to be able to access the financing mechanisms. But we work through partnerships. For example, the Shared Resources Joint Solutions Program, under which we are hosting this talk show together with WWF. It's a program which believes that natural resources, including the big cats that we're talking about today, are an international public good. Everybody should not be excluded from enjoying them, and also everybody should contribute to their existence or to their survival. That is why we have the tagline of Shared Resources, Joint Solutions. They are resources for everybody, but it also takes everybody's action to be able to maintain their existence, to maintain the ability of the ecosystems to provide the services that we enjoy.
Yes. All right. And brilliant. If you go on our Twitter page, the hashtag we're using is Conservation Uganda, so you can put there your comments and contributions to share your own opinions and ideas on how we can make sure that we really improve this area of need in our country. So, David, WWF is what you're representing. You're the country director. So, because we need to first understand that this, the minister is simply, doesn't have any obscurity or anonymity. The ministry is known and its mandate is known. So, what does WWF do? And just help us to understand the culture also, the heritage, and the role of the big cats family in our national wildlife ecosystem itself, and your concerns as worldwide life.
Thank you. Our viewers, WWF is a conservation organization. It's a global conservation organization with a long history
It has no relationship with the World Wrestling.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that. It's a global conservation organization, and it has various names depending on which country you come from. The World Wildlife Fund, that was the beginning, and now we call it Worldwide Fund for Nature. And then in Canada, they have a different, way they call it based on their language. They are the French or Anglophone Canada. So in Uganda, we adopt the global international acronym that is WWF. Makes a lot of sense for us to do that. It's a conservation organization. Started well back in 1961. And the origin of this organization started in East Africa. And it was about wildlife. A prince from the UK came to visit Kenya. And in that time, there was this, trophy hunting, which was a sport for rich people coming to Africa to kill wildlife and take them back as trophies.
And actually it's still existing.
And it's still existing.
Yes, in sub-Saharan
and this
countries.
prince came to Kenya and saw this rampant carnage on wildlife.
That's the World Wildlife
So he went back and started a campaign that, if we don't do anything about the African heritage on wildlife, which is so special and very unique to the world, they are going to get wiped out. So he started a campaign in Europe under the IUCN.
That is the International
Union for Conservation of Nature. So WWF became a campaign unit under IUCN and also a fundraiser. Raised quite a number of money, a lot of money, that were injected in beginning to create protected areas in Africa.
Yes.
Having policies and legislation in Africa during the colonial time to set aside protected areas so that there's restricted or control hunting or control measures put in place to really check on the activity which was happening at that time. So that was the creation of WWF. We have a mission, and our mission has evolved over time from just looking at species as wildlife and looking at the greater planet. So we strive to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment and to build a future in which humans can live in harmony with nature. Very strong.
It's there on the screen.
And we do this by conserving the world biological resources, by ensuring that renewable resources are used in a sustainable way, and also to check on pollution and wasteful consumption of resources. Solid. So when you come down to Uganda, our existence has started all the way from 1992. And we are working in the Rwenzori Mountains National Park in collaboration with the government of Uganda and civil society organization. That engagement sort of hit a snag when there was insecurity in that region during the ADF problem of the early 90s. So we came back again in 2001, and now we have been in existence in the country continuously without any break for 17 years. And in these 17 years, we have evolved to become a country office, and we are working, delivering our conservation program through 3 main programs. And this is freshwater, climate and energy, and extractives, and forest biodiversity and wildlife.
Yeah, which includes, of course, the big cats.
The big cats and so on.
So
and basically, how do we deliver this? Is by looking at capacity building, raising awareness, undertaking research on policy and science of this wildlife, and using a gender right-based approach and livelihood to deliver on this conservation targets.
Okay, brilliant work, John. Let me see our head of the sector, Professor Ephraim. So the IUCN Red List actually indicated that now these 3 species, the lions and the cheetahs, of course, they are highly vulnerable, and they have a ranking mechanism that critically endangered is nearly actually getting to extinction, endangered is moderate, and vulnerable is under threat. And the leopards, of course, they are nearly being threatened. And there was a report, a very major report, I think that you are aware of. So we just need to understand how exactly are these big cats being taken care of by local communities themselves. Is there some kind of democratic involvement by the communities? As you were communicating, of course, the mental change, but is there practical engagement to make sure that the population right down there appreciates the value of these animals?
Yeah, no, that's true. As you may well know, this is almost like an international agenda item, that communities must be included and nobody should be left behind. And as a result of that thrust globally, Uganda right now, we have communities neighboring national parks. They are organized and they benefit and they share in the revenue generated by these parks. Billions of shillings are distributed to these communities. The essential purpose of that is to make these communities have a stake in conservation. But beyond having a stake, I would want you, Walden, to know that since the beginning of time and the way God created things, He created them in a balanced manner and in an interconnected manner. So the plea I have been making for Ugandans is to know that when, for instance, a lion or a leopard or these cheetahs are extinct, you're creating balance. I've traveled out with tourists. My friend, if a tourist doesn't see a lion, he feels his trip
has been cheated.
Really has been in vain. And that is an icon animal for Uganda, not only for the tourists, but even your own children. Can you imagine if the children in future was to come and there is no lion they can see because their predecessors or their ancestors didn't care for it? It's a moral issue. So as a government, yes, we have put a lot of things in place. You have almost 10% of Uganda's land size is devoted to conservation. And we have more than 2,000 rangers specifically for protecting these animals from being poached. You have barriers, trenches to stop animals from straying into people's gardens and being poisoned and being killed. And if you see the resource the government is putting on conservation, it's quite reasonable. And as you can see from my colleagues here, these are international institutions in partnership with government for conservation. But conservation must have a purpose. And the purpose is simply if there was imbalance in God's creation, it definitely would have even the human beings. It's just only that some people have a short-term view. You want profit today? Think about this environmental encroachment that you have been seeing, people powering maram in wetlands, building buildings in wetlands without realizing that if water got dry, the forests got wiped out, your survival would be simply endangered. They don't see it, but the man looks at the money he can get from encroachment. In broad terms, Uganda is committed, it is in our constitution. The objectives of policy and principles of directive state policy in the constitution of the Republic of Uganda enjoins the government to protect and defend wildlife for us and future generations, and we are going to do it. It becomes easier when the population appreciates their own survival and links it. I don't know why it takes so much to understand. If God created this thing that He said it was good, God Himself, if you look back, human being from the beginning of civilization, whether it is food or clothing or medicine, it was on plants and animals. So if you wipe out these plants and animals, as it was in the beginning is now, where is your life?
Okay, and good enough you're saying the government is saying something, rather is doing something, and definitely we are observing that. And,
Thank you very much.
okay. So, Pauline, this is a very hugely treasurable area. It's a sector that is really fetching lots of money for our country, for our economy. About 1.3 billion US dollars were harvested in 2016, and you know, we're asking ourselves, do you think actually people understand the economic enormity and value of this treasure that we have, the big cats, the lions, the cheetahs? How are Ugandans interested in these animals? Do you think they're really properly interested in the value of these animals themselves? And what should we do to ensure that we interest them better?
There are so many opportunities. When you look at traditionally, the way our communities are set up, every community that has traditional rulers, kings and what have you, the symbols are big cats.
Yeah.
Meaning that right from long
That's
time
true.
ago, we do understand the role of big cats, our heritage. There are so many things that are associated
They're an
with
expression
it.
of power.
Exactly,
and
an
of treasure,
expression of power, an expression
of opulence and security.
Exactly,
yes.
exactly. And when you look at the interconnectedness that he's been talking about, these animals sit on top of the food chain. They are the rulers. They control the food chain. They are responsible for regulating the populations of everything underneath. If you take away their role, then you have heard about survival for the fittest.
Yes.
When these animals are controlling the population, they go for the weak animals, they go for the deformed animals, they're weeding out bad genes. So when the populations are growing, it's in such a way that it's only the healthy genes that are being propagated into the next generation, and so on and so forth. I think that because we used to have cultural value to attach to these animals, we inherently understand how important they are. But I think what Ugandans do not understand is that they really don't understand the status. You talked about the global status. They are considered vulnerable. But in Uganda, they are considered critical. Critical is the highest form, is just before extinction.
Yes.
Yeah? Just
Because if
like
you just have less than 10
exactly. I don't even know whether those populations are viable anymore, you know? So they don't understand, because they take these things for granted. They have seen the greenery, they drive through all these expanses of beautiful sceneries. They don't even know that it's that beautiful. So they take these things for granted. They don't think that something will happen to it. They think that they will always be there. So a part of us understands it. The part of Uganda where I come from, there are clans whose totems are these big cats. But we think that they will always be there. You think that you will always have a totem which is a leopard, and it will always be there. So they don't internalize that these things are becoming extinct, that they are disappearing, and therefore you will be losing this.
Okay, great. And just on that note, David, I'll get back to you definitely when I need us to go to a break, and I'll come and ask about the 3rd March day that is coming, the UN World Wildlife Day, and the theme that has been set, how it co-joins this urgent discussion that we're having, and how it will actually enable the improvement of the conservation efforts in this nation. So thanks our viewers for keeping with us, and we have disrupted our normal programming, but this is a very valuable discussion. We will be back after this short break. Thanks our viewers for keeping with us. We're discussing how we can conserve our most treasurable animals in this country. That is lions, cheetahs and leopards. And of course, the different other species of natural treasures. But today we're concentrating specifically this, and it acts as a microcosm of our national nature conservation. So on Facebook, I have a listening of responses, and I have Moses Impoa, who says that you must fight poaching. Secondly, you should release all animals in captivity in zoos back to their natural habitats to live a free life they were supposed to live. That is like the Uganda World Education Center. Then reserve areas. This is Prince Lawrence Zike. He says that you should reserve areas. Rather, reserved areas should be given out for those animals because Uganda has still got too much of free lands. Then second last, Nsereko Celesta, he says that there is need to sensitize the community members living near, something we've been talking about, near protected areas on the relevance of wildlife conservation, as well as training them how they can live in harmony. Then I have quite a divergent response from Alingai Nyura Robert, who says that first of all, as a tour guide that has been moving in most of these parks, when you give me statistics of 10 leopards in our parks, there is no way how I can believe Lake Mburo National Park, Queen Elizabeth National Park, or Murchison Falls National Park must be having more than 10 leopards. Gentlemen, these were studies, very systematic studies that were done by Makerere University in conjunction with the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, and several other entities. So I can only use authoritative information. If you have any authoritative statistics, kindly please post them here. So David, representing WWF, the UN General Assembly proclaimed 3rd March to be World Conservation Day. And Uganda, for this particular week, rather for this particular day, has specifically decided to concentrate on this. So what is going to be achieved? What is going to be done? Let's just give a highlight slightly on this day, and then we proceed on with Professor Kamuntu.
Thank you. This is a global day for really recognizing the importance of this wildlife and the challenges that we have globally about them. Just to give you a background to this, as far back as in the 60s, discussion had already started about how do we control international trade on wildlife. Mm-hmm. And this was actually, as again in East Africa, in Kenya, mm-hmm. Where the Assembly of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature met and made a decision that something has got to be done. A draft of a convention has got to be done. It had not yet gone to the UN, but this proposal was adopted by the UN, and as far back as 1973 and 2013, UN actually came up and said, let's recognize CITES as an international convention. And countries came in to assign and ratify the convention. So it's an important convention to save and manage wildlife. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, 3rd March,
yes,
since 2014 has always been celebrated at this International Day. And different themes do come. Mm-hmm. From a global perspective, what are the issues? So the theme for this year is about the big cats, in recognition that the big cats are threatened well over. Look at the tigers, look at the jaguars, look at the pumas. Those are the big cats, and the lions. Those are the ones which roar, and they make this very charismatic and important characteristic of theirs. Mm-hmm. But now, because of this threat, global threat, some other smaller big cats have also been included in the range of big cats to be protected and given the utmost awareness to the public to conserve them. And in Uganda, as you said, our statistics of the population of our animals is very worrying. We would like to raise the profile of awareness about the importance of these big cats. The sale of our wildlife as a land use, as an economic activity, is hinged on the importance of big cats.
Yeah, just in a minute. So, is there an activity arrangement of activities?
A series of activities. Yeah, this particular talk is one of them, which is ongoing. There is going to be another public talk next week.
Public lecture, yes.
A public lecture.
Yes.
And we are going to go back to
Also
Kasese
marathon.
with a number of activities, including actually launching of this particular strategy for the Rwenzori, which
Product
is
review and marketing
a
strategy
new
for the
marketing
Rwenzori.
strategy for Rwenzori that has been worked together with UTB,
Rwenzori
Uganda
is
Wildlife
the
Authority.
Kabarore, Kasese,
Exactly,
and
exactly.
It has lots of these cuts.
So we are also going to have a marathon race on Sunday.
Yes.
And
Sunday?
Yes,
From
this
the
Sunday.
Okay, so
Starting
so
the
invitation
museum.
is what? Is
From
there a
the
payment? What? Because the public is watching and do.
Yes, everybody is welcome. They will have to make some little payment and get the T-shirts.
how much?
Get yourself ready. Just come into any tents. We have tents. Some of the T-shirts are already bought. Like for if you come to the WWF tent, you will just remove your shirt and put on.
Okay, how much?
Come at least with about.
I know that the corporate sponsorship is, corporate team is 500,000.
Okay, corporate team.
Only.
All right, all right.
And then there is a 5 kilometer and
What
a
about an
10
individual?
There is
kilometer.
5 kilometer, there is 21 if you
So
are
an individual's
And a 10
contribution goes
There is
down.
kilometer.
10, there is 10 kilometer
There is
marathon.
10,000, there is 20,000.
Okay, 10,000, 20,000. Please, that is at the National Museum.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is
On
on
Sunday.
Sunday.
On Sunday at
All right,
6 in
great.
the
So,
morning.
Professor Ephraim, now, definitely the Constitution, just as you are alluding to, obligates the state to protect important natural resources, including land, water, wetlands, minerals, oil,
Yes, yes.
flora and fauna.
Yes,
And
yes.
Article 237, Section 2 of the same Constitution provides that the government, as determined by Parliament by law, shall hold in trust for the people and protect natural lakes, rivers, wetlands, and a plethora of exactly what you know. So, and you've been given money to that effect, the Ministry of Wildlife, Tourism and Antiquities. You can see the figures in 2016, 2017. You were allocated about an approval of 19 billion was done, and then 20 billion was actually released, and you used 98.2%. And the Uganda Tourism Board, still in that regard, was given about 1.8. Yeah, for the wage expenses was 1.855, non-wage recurrent was 7 billion, development, all that. So the issue here is you're given money to do this work, to conserve, of course, to protect and to promote. How much has been spent in here? What are the development expenses, especially in this area of conservation? Just to know how we are capitalized in advancing this cause.
Well, thank you very much. First, I think the public should know that government through Uganda Wildlife Authority, which is a mandated institution, we are implementing a strategic action plan for conservation of these large carnivores, the big cats. And the intention is to increase and stabilize the population of these animals. We are also improving the habitats for these animals. I want to stress that the conservation of these animals is a global issue, because when you talk about habitats of these animals, you're also talking about climate change. And climate change is a global issue. Even if Uganda did everything
Without the collaboration of
without
others.
collaboration of the rest of the world, you wouldn't go very far. I want also to mention quite clearly, if you have a country that puts aside 10% of its land size for conservation, surely the commitment of that land cannot be of that country cannot be doubted. That's why we want globally the world to understand that we are really doing everything possible. We're involving local communities in conservation deliberately. Deliberate policy for conservation to be a shared, valued responsibility between communities, neighboring national parks, and the government action. Furthermore, we are collaborating with international institutions. As you can see, we are right here. These are international institutions. Beyond all this is for humanity to know that the linkage, the balance between these, once destabilized, it will have an effect on our life as human beings. So the money they have given us, we are spending it properly on conservation. My only appeal, he has mentioned it, is we have for instance, this 3rd March of every year is an international day set aside. It is an international day set aside. They call it World Wildlife Day.
Yeah.
Meaning the world is to pay attention or be sensitized, devote this day and be sensitized, bring awareness of the centrality of this wildlife to the survival of human beings. And we are going to do it.
Yes.
We started with the press briefing. Today we are here. Tomorrow there will be a public lecture at Imperial, again focused on the importance of conservation of these animals. On Sunday there will be a marathon starting at National Park, a National Museum. We will go to Kasese. There will be quizzes for primary, for secondary, and for tertiary institutions, again focused on this. And there will be marching on that day, and the president is expected to officiate at that function. The whole day is devoted to this. So what is the purpose of doing all this? Centrally to show that Ugandans' awareness increases about the importance of conservation of these animals.
Okay, thank you indeed.
I have mentioned it to you and I want to emphasize it. The linkage. Yes, let me link it.
Yes, just in
I have traveled with tourists. If they don't see a lion, they feel that their trip has not been really successful. So if you link it, tourist arrivals in this country, or tourism in this country, is based on nature assets. Consequently, foreign exchange that is derived from tourists is linked to conserving these natural assets. For if they were not there, these tourists would not come. And if they didn't come, you didn't have foreign exchange. And if you didn't have foreign exchange, your balance of payment position would not be that supported, and your prices for imports in the market would hit everybody. That's how important this subject you are discussing is. Absolutely. The economic transformation of this country.
Indeed. Thank you. And there are threats, Pauline, to these big cuts, just as we've been, of course, hinting on them along the way. But just to be more specific, there are illegal activities in protected areas, which include poaching and grazing. Poaching affects big cats, of course, in several ways, and loss of habitat due to human population increase, which seems to be a competing and compelling reason for actually to dispel or take extinct these animals, because there's development need, there's population need, and then you have global warming issues. You have human wildlife conflicts when animals come into direct contact with the human population, and they're actually the losers, they're killed. So what needs to be done much better or much more? What are the deficiencies in terms of actions that are being taken that need to be improved for us to ensure that we have a positive trajectory of conserving, improving, and increasing these numbers of these animals?
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the biggest threat is the health of the habitat, the health of the habitat in which these animals live or are supposed to live. Yeah. And if we could go back to what I mentioned earlier about these animals being on top of the food chain, they are also indicator species. Yes. So because by the time they become extinct, they are telling or they are indicator of the general health of the habitat. Or by the time they begin disappearing, they are indicators of the general health of the habitat. So if we can look at them as... Habitat is the collective community of the natural species in a given area. So by the time there is no lion or there is no leopard or cheetah, then the forest or the wetland or the savanna has lost the ability to provide the services that we need. The same services that even we as human beings depend on, regulating water flow, ensuring that there is water quality, and so on and so forth. So these are just indicators. So if we can't do it for the big cats, we need to do it for us. Because when we keep these same habitats where the big cats live, we also improve on our own access to these services. Now, one of the things that we've realized as an organization is that there are a few individuals that contribute to the conservation of these sites. And actually, from our experience, it is not the communities that are nearest to these habitats that really destroy them. When the timber is being cut, it's coming to build in Kampala. When extractives are happening, they are going to bigger cities, they are going elsewhere. These people don't even use charcoal, but when they are burning charcoal, they are selling it in Kampala. Yeah. So there are people, from our observation, the people that stay around these ecosystems, or the people that stay around the protected areas and so on and so forth, they actually understand the value because they are at the front line. When the habitat is degraded and the wildcats are moving out, it's their animals that get lost. So they have a very close interaction. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to improve on the incentive mechanisms that harness the contribution that these people make, recognize and reward them for that contribution, and even empower them. And most of the times when the government is designing policies and is coming up with actions on what should be done, they sit in their offices in Kampala and they consult most of us who can speak English, who can understand these difficult languages in which these policies are written. Yet most of the times these people have innovations, they have experiences, they have ideas that can contribute to effective strategies, but they are rarely consulted. Their voices are rarely heard. And also one of the things that when we do whatever we do to the environment, and they pay the price of suffering the consequences of the crop raids, attacks on bodily harm and even death. Yeah. But then we ask them to count it a loss. You know, we expect that for us we would share the bulk of the benefits, even when it's tourism. It's people like me and you that invest in tour companies that take tourists to these areas. So we expect that the rest of us will be getting the lion's share of the benefit, and then they will be incurring the cost. So there is need to harmonize, to balance, to have a way of recognizing the contributions that these local communities make, but also harness the expertise that they have, the contribution that they make, and incentivize them to continue making that contribution or even get it better. I know that these animals can be bred, but I think it's much cheaper, much cost effective if we let them be. If we let them propagate themselves, if we let them have an environment where they can grow on their own. Although some of the numbers, as we said, they are too small for that a population to be viable. And then also they are scattered. There is no mingling of population. If there is some 5 on one side and maybe 4 somewhere else, in between they are human beings. So you will not have these gene pools exchanging so that they are able to maintain healthy populations. So much as I wish that we could just have these habitats healthy so that they can multiply on their own, I think that there are additional interventions that need to be made to make sure that that ability to propagate is enhanced. Okay, thank you. Pretty good, innovative and sound recommendations. And on Facebook, I have Immaculate Wampamba, who says that everyone should be concerned. For the last 2 weeks, none of our guests has been able to sight any lions in Queen Elizabeth, more so Ishasha sector. Other animal numbers too seem to have gone down. The authorities need to look into it. Now this seems to be a tour guide or a tourist business person, and yet another individual was complaining that the statistics I had cited were wrong. And then I have Muhiwe Abdul, Uganda Parks, says enhancement of community conservation. Now I want just to invite 3 callers just call us on your phone. And let's engage, I want 3 calls, I need to emphasize that. And then we shall get a response, a feedback to this show, especially the Minister of Wildlife, Tourism and Antiquities, Professor Ephraim, is here. He's the head of the sector. So very authoritative person in this regard. Whatever he says, we will take it on as authoritative. So let me come to you again, Professor. The oil and gas policy 2008 under section 7261 requires the ministry responsible for tourism and wildlife to harmonize tourism and wildlife policies with oil and gas policy. The oil and gas policy has become extremely prominent
that it is forcing a need for harmonization for the policies that are there. Of course, there's a bill that has been introduced in Parliament recently which needs to also incorporate the Land Use Policy 2007. All these laws need to be harmonized. You know, we have so many laws in our country, and at times they just cross paths and they blockade the effectiveness of each other. So we need to understand the policy status right now of actually protection, conservation, and the need for the numerical increase of these animals in Uganda. How do we deal with poachers? How do we deal with trophy hunters? But especially the policy status right now.
Okay, let me begin with the policy front.
Yes.
We have carried out policy reforms intended to enhance protection of these animals. Also, Wildlife Research Training Institute Act has been revised. The aim is to enhance, whatever we do as a government, it must be a kind of scientifically based, statistical, data-backed direction. So within the government itself, there is a cabinet subcommittee on oil and gas. This subcommittee includes Minister of Energy, Minister of Tourism, Wildlife,
Which is you, yeah.
which is me, Minister of Local Government, and Minister of Water, and a series of them. As you can see how related they are. They also are supported by a technical committee, which includes NEMA, National Forest Authority, Wildlife Authority, and others. These look at the impact of oil on the environment. And for us, and I can say it without any stammering, while oil and gas is a huge potential for this country's economic development, but it is what they call a wasting asset. It will finish at some point. And consequently, your sustainable source of development is real wildlife. We have been with it since the beginning of time, and we will have with it. So you want a balance. You must have oil. At the same time, you must have this conservation taking place. It is not a zero sum. It is not either or. No, we can have both. And to show you that this has worked. Previously, you could flare any gases coming from drilling. But we insisted, because flaring scares animals, we insisted that the oil companies must use a technology that must not involve flaring, and they obliged, they complied. Just to show you that Ugandans they should take comfort in the knowledge that we are conscious of sustainably maintaining our wildlife, at the same time having oil, these two being done in a manner that doesn't compromise the conservation of our wildlife. Because after all, when oil is finished, what we shall remain with is these animals. That is being done. Second, which you have mentioned, in terms of policy, we have also improved or revised the Wildlife Bill Act. The act has been revised. It is before Parliament right now as I'm talking to you. In that act, anyone called wildlife trafficker, we put him on notice. We have also improved for compensation for genuine farmers' crops being destroyed by wildlife. There will be a compensation. Previously, it wasn't there. Also, we have involved communities' participation in conservation and sharing revenue. 20% of revenue generated by national parks will be given to communities neighboring these. The sum total of all that is, one, to work on the minds of Ugandans, change to see that really these animals, we depend on them as they depend on us, and at the same time to show that we benefit from their being with us, their conservation. If you follow Vision 2040, we have a tourist master plan as well. Tourism master plan, which is a 10-year development plan. In that plan, measures are proposed where we are addressing the issue of human life-wildlife conflict as well. So in my own judgment, the policies are in place. The challenge will remain is now implementation of these policies.
Okay, and you are the forefront of it. Now, viewers, I'm being informed we have less time, so we cannot have cause. I need this show to be wrapped up. Now, David and Pauline, just 1 minute. Let me start with David. How is the civil society helping to engage, especially in this East African region, to contribute to the security of these animals? Is there a collective effort besides WWF? And just in a minute, and what is the future of this? What do you see ahead? Just as we wrap up.
Thank you. From the civil society perspective, I think there is a growing, partnership with government and the private sector to move towards sustainable utilization and management of these wildlife assets. And this is taking place all over the region. Our engagement on policy research and drafting policy papers and being able to communicate that and engage with governments in East Africa to improve on their policy, and also to look at harmonizing some of the policy situation so that what happens in Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda can be really something that can be handled as a unit, not having different situation. And secondly, I think as civil society, we have a role to engage better with communities because we are much more, flexible in the way we engaged. And for example, like WWF now, the total budget that I have, 40% has to go into civil society, capacity building, and empowerment. These are the communities the minister is talking about that should be actively engaged and should be participant in ensuring that wildlife management is benefiting them. At the same time, they are responsible to make sure that they support the institutions and agencies to make sure that some of these challenges that we face that relate to criminality, they are part of the solution to that.
Okay, thank you so much indeed over that. Pauline, our last comment, especially the issues of climate change. How do we ensure that as we are moving on, what are some of the key issues that we need to be conversant with in this coming future to ensure that, just like that these animals don't deteriorate?
One of the things that people need to understand about climate change is the issue of vulnerability. Just like when you see human beings, if you live in a bad environment, if you live in a house with holes through the roof, or if you live in places like Wise, when it floods, you will be affected the most. So the same thing with the animals. The habitat is their home. So if the habitat is degraded, that means when there is climate change, they will be the ones most affected. And this issue of climate change, for example, it reduces the range where, for example, hunting is suitable. But also these animals, much as they are charismatic and they run fast, they are actually lazy. It's in other instances they are lazy because, for example, they can't hunt when it's too hot. And what happens is that they will not be able to run after the antelopes and all those other fast animals. So what will they do? They will go for easy prey. So they will go for the goats and the cows that we have in our homes. And then the people will defend themselves.
They will poison them.
They will poison them, yes, they will hunt them. So
them.
it becomes a vicious cycle. So me, I'm thinking, my opinion is that if we can make everything that we can do to make the habitat healthy and stop this thing of thinking that one national park is the one that is going to protect the lions, because they need to be moving. Like they need, if this part has been grossly affected by climate change, they need to have that connectivity between the different habitats. So we need to be looking at conservation from a landscape level, whereby we are looking at it as a landscape as opposed to fragmented parks.
Yeah, thank you so much indeed. Time bad, but very, very resourceful discussion. Professor Ephraim Kamuntu, Pauline Natongo, and David Dooley. Please, thanks indeed. You've been
Can I appeal
You've
to...
been
Yes,
I'm going to be kicked out of the
I can only appeal to all who are listening to us to join us in Kasese for celebrating the World Wildlife Day.
On 3rd March.
On 3rd March.
Okay, thank you indeed for being here. You've been such a very resourceful panel.
Thank you.
And our viewers, we are grateful for indeed enduring this alteration of our normal programming. And I request that if you're there as a ministry or department or agency or an NGO, please come talk to us and have comprehensive discussions like this that help to advance the good of our country. Next is the Brand Music Show. Please have a great night. I'm Karaga Bodwins.
Yes.